Hi, it's Katrina, and today I'm revisiting the goals I made right at the start of the year for my reading in 2017 and setting myself some goals for the end of the year. So right at the start of the year, I set myself 3 vaguer goals. The first was to read 24 books in the year. This was because in 2016 I put a lot of pressure on myself to reach the 100 book goal mark. I ended up reading a lot of short books and ones I didn't love so much. So this year I wanted to completely take the pressure off, read as many big complex books as I could, really take my time with things and enjoy the books I was reading more. I've definitely accomplished that. I passed the 24 book mark in April, and the second part of that goal, to read more complex books, I've definitely also done. I read Anna Karenina, Middlemarch, War and Peace, the whole Live Ship Traders trilogy, each of which is over 800 pages. So yes, very satisfied with both parts of that goal. I also wanted to read some more translated books, books weren't from or set in the UK and the US. I think in some ways I've achieved this. Anna Karenina, like I was saying, and War and Peace are both Russian literature. I read 100 Shadows by Hwang Jung-yoon, which is a Korean piece of fiction, but overall I think I could have done better with this, and I'm hoping to do better with it towards the end of the year. Just increasing the number of books I'm buying and reading that are set in or from an author with very different experiences from mine. At the start of the year I also picked 10 books I really wanted to get to this year, and so far I've read 4 of them, which isn't bad, but I really want to get to the other 6 by the end of the year. 4 I got to were the Live Ship Traders books. Specifically, I just set myself to read A Ship of Magic, which I read the whole trilogy, in love with it. Review for that whole trilogy coming very soon. I also wanted to read Book of Serpents by Mary Brennan, which is the second book in the Lady Trent memoir series. Read that, loved it. Can't wait to finish that series. I've also read Ruby by Cynthia Bond, which I had kind of mixed feelings about. I'm hoping to review that very soon. And I've also read Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I absolutely loved. Now one of my all-time favourite books. I have a whole review for that up on my channel already, which I will link above. So that leaves me with 6 books still on my TBR. I've added 4 more to round it up to around 10. So the first that is left over from the start of the year is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I really want to read this book. I've heard so many great things from so many different sources. I've just been not so much in a fantasy mood just the last couple of months. But as soon as I'm back in the mood to pick up a big fantasy, this is exactly where I'm going to reach. Next, I wanted to pick up Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I just hear so much about V.E. Schwab on YouTube. I really want to pick up the Darker Shade of Magic series. I don't like having multiple books from the same author unread on my shelf, so I want to read this first. Everyone seems to rave about this book, so another one that I'm not sure why I've not picked up yet. I also want to pick up The Green Mile by Stephen King. I've read a couple of King books and enjoyed them in the past. I've just not quite got around to picking this up yet. I actually just recently got this on audiobook, so I think that might be how I start it. Having loved Stephen King's writing in the past, I'm excited, really excited for this. Next we have The Tenant of Wellfell Hall by Anne Bronte. I've actually read quite a few classics this year, especially recently, so I'm kind of annoyed at myself for not picking this up when I set it out as a classic I really wanted to read at the start of the year, but oh well. I love Charlotte and Emily Bronte's work, so I'm looking forward to reading this, especially after it got such rave reviews from Sam over at Sam's Nonsense, whose reviews I really trust. Another kind of chunky one is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. Anyone who I've ever heard read a Sarah Waters book just raves and raves about her writing and her stories, so I'm sure that when I do eventually tackle this, I'm just going to love it as well. But last but not least is The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. I've just not really been in a huge literary fiction mood recently. I've been reading mostly classics, and I'm a little intimidated by this one just because it has that sort of literary fiction kind of hype around it. The 4 I've added onto this list to make it up to the 10 books I'd like to read by the end of the year, starting with Black Rise to Canterford by Flora Thompson. This is my lovely Folio Classics edition. A while ago I made a whole video talking about my entire TBR. At the time, Lizard by Banana Yoshimoto was the book I'd had on there longest. This was the second longest, so really hoping to read this by the end of the year. I've basically told myself if I don't get to this by the end of the year, I'm just going to get rid of it. For a while, I was trying to read whatever book was longest on my TBR by the end of each month, and then at the end of the month, if I hadn't read it, I had to get rid of it. But with the craziness of me moving and all that kind of thing, I've sort of let that slide. But I'd really like to read this, and then next year really commit to that whole longest book, you've got a month to read it or get rid of it thing. This is a collection of 3 semi-autobiographical novels following our main character, who starts off in this poor village called Larkrise and eventually sort of progresses in her life over to Candleford, which is the local market town, which is a bit more upmarket and fancy. This is set in Victorian times but written 1940s, looking back on the author's life. I adored the TV series for this. I watched it every time. I watched it every week, every series, loved it so much, so I'm really interested to see the source material, particularly now it's been quite a while since I've seen the TV series, so I've got that good distance. I can't quite remember everything, so I won't be able to compare too closely, but hopefully the nostalgia will still be there. Next is a book that I just want to read to complete the series. That is The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the 4th in the Raven cycle. I read Blue Lily Lily Blue, which is the 3rd book, right at the end of last year. It's been a really long time, and I really enjoyed The Raven Boys, which is the 1st book in this series, and just each book subsequently disappointed me slightly. So I've not been super excited to pick this up, but I really want to complete the series. I don't want to leave it too long to the point where I have to reread the other books, because I don't know if I'll be able to get myself to do that. This is a young adult fantasy series set in Virginia. There are 4 boys who go to this elite private school and a local girl, Blue, and they join together and have all sorts of adventures. One of the boys, Gansey, is on this mission to try and find this dead Welsh king who, if awoken, will grant a wish, and he is known as the Raven King. So I really want to pick this one up, and it's so beautiful. Another series I'd like to continue with is the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. I read the 1st book, Annihilation, I think in 2016, but it might have been 2015, and I've picked up Authority, which is the 2nd book. This is a sci-fi series which is quite difficult to explain. It follows this Area X, which very little is known about. There's lots of failed expeditions there and people returning mysteriously. The Southern Reach are the government body responsible for Area X, and I believe that this follows that government body, the 1st book in the trilogy, following a scientist who went into Area X. The 1st book was really interesting and I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't compelling to start the new one, especially given I know it's going to follow different characters, but I'm really hoping to get to this by the end of the year so I can read the 3rd one and have read the whole and I've read the whole trilogy. And last but not least, this year I really like to read East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I spoke about this book quite recently when I hauled it, but I've had a rocky history with John Steinbeck because sensitive teenage Katrina was burned by reading The Red Pony and Of Mice and Men, but I feel like I'm ready to be a big girl and try him again, and I've heard such amazing things from East of Eden, especially from Leslie over at Words of a Reader. This cover is just stunning. Upsettingly, Penguin have decided to rebrand all their modern classics. They're changing all from a white spine to a duck egg blue, and they're also changing the cover images on some authors, one of which is John Steinbeck, and all the new ones, a lot of them are really ugly now, which is sad, because now my collection isn't all going to match, but that's a story for another day. I believe this is a multi-generational novel setting the farming communities of California. This is published like 1920s, so I believe it's from, I guess, a few generations before that, leading up. I've heard this is his most ambitious novel and lots of really complex characters, so I'm excited to see what it's all about. I've barely reread books this year. About 5 years ago, I reread almost as often as I read new books, if not more. One year I decided, I've got so many books that I haven't read that I own, I'm going to have a whole year of not rereading books. And that sort of broke the cycle for me. And I miss rereading, I really love rereading. I'm just really not in the habit anymore. But here I have 5 books I'd love to reread by the end of the year. First up is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. I read this right at the very end of 2016 and I loved it. It's really sad, melancholy, frankly depressing little book. It's very short, and this is a story narrated by a man who meets our main character Ethan Frome, picks up a few little details of his life and constructs this sort of narrative. It's really interesting and just sort of sad and cold, but waiting for the colder months to pick this up. So probably November, December again, and yeah, experience this book again. I love Edith Wharton's writing. One from way back in my past is The Mill and the Floss by George Eliot. This cover is absolutely stunning. This is the Vintage Classics edition. This year I read Middlemarch for the first time and I fell in love with it. I enjoyed The Mill and the Floss when I first read it, but it was a long time ago. I think it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. I barely remember it. I hadn't read many classics at the time and it took me a really long time. So this I'm really excited to go back to. This is another Victorian novel. That seems to be a theme of this video, and this follows a brother and sister, Maggie and Tom Tulliver. They're very different, but they have this amazing bond, and I think the brother-sister relationships or any sort of sibling relationship isn't explored that often in literature. It was definitely in Middlemarch, and I'm excited to see that sort of focused in on again in The Mill and the Floss. Really not much I actually remember about this book, so I'm excited to pick it up. The next one is one, again, I read in 2016, but this one I didn't really enjoy that much, and that is Europe in Autumn by Dave Hutchison. But I was in a massive reading slump when I read this book. I was shattered all the time, and I would try and read this, and I remember like falling asleep as I was reading it and not taking it in. And it really wasn't the fault of the book. I remember just not enjoying it, not knowing what was going on, but ploughing through it anyway, which was a mistake. I've heard great things about this book. I love sci-fi and want to read more of it, so I really want to read this again because I've heard that the whole trilogy is great. This is set in Eastern Europe, and it's set in a world where, following lots of economic crises and plagues, Europe has sort of broken down into all these little principalities, and things are going a little awry. Our main character, Rudy, becomes part of this crime syndicate, and honestly I can't remember much more from that. I need to read this again. I really do. This actually starts out in Krakow, which is really exciting. I'm going there with my boyfriend in November, so hopefully I'll read it then and it'll be really atmospheric. And the last two I'd really like to reread by the end of the year are my top 2 all-time favourite books. The first of which is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This is just a beautiful book. This is sweetness and light and English countryside just captured in one book. This is published in 1949. It was written during the Second World War and looking back on life between the wars, and sort of simple country life in England. Our main character, Cassandra, lives in this ramshackle house, castle with her family. There's some really amazing characters in this book, and Cassandra, the main character, just steals your heart. It's about struggles and family and love, first love, and like I say, just the joy of the English countryside. Something a bit more dramatic. My other all-time favourite book is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is my very battered but adored edition. I first read this in 2008, nearly 10 years ago, and I've loved it ever since. This has a whole host of just disgustingly unlikable characters who have these violent emotions, and just you're swept along on the moors with them. Heathcliff and Cathy, our main characters. Heathcliff, who is massively mistreated in his childhood, comes back and seeks revenge on the love of his life, the man she's married, and their whole family. It's absolutely heart-wrenching, but just so passionate. Kind of a Marmite book, this one, but I will always love Wuthering Heights. Don't tell me to read Jane Eyre. I've read Jane Eyre. I like Jane Eyre. It's just not Wuthering Heights. So there we go. That was my 2017 goals revisited and just up the ante a little bit for the end of the year. Subscribe to see more videos from me and how I get on with these. You can also follow me on Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter, all of which are linked below. Thanks for watching. Bye.